My phone had rung 23 times before the Thanksgiving turkey was even carved. 23. I know that because I counted the missed calls while sitting at a small restaurant overlooking the Charleston harbor, 1,000 miles away from the chaos I had apparently caused. Melissa. 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 Jason. Melissa. Melissa again. Then 3 texts, then more calls. The waitress set a basket of warm rolls in front of me and smiled. Family emergency. I looked at the screen, then out toward the water where the late afternoon sun shimmered across the harbor. No, I said quietly. Then I turned the phone face down. For the first time in nearly 30 years, I ate Thanksgiving dinner without cooking it. And for the first time in nearly 30 years, I didn't feel guilty about it. At least not anymore. A week earlier, I had been standing in my kitchen in Columbus, Ohio, holding a mug of coffee when my phone buzzed. It was Melissa, my daughter-in-law. At first, I smiled. Melissa and I had always gotten along reasonably well. Not perfectly, but reasonably. She was organized. Efficient. The kind of woman who color-coded calendars and planned Christmas shopping in September. I figured she was sending information about Thanksgiving. Instead, I received what looked more like a project management document. There were 14 dishes listed. 14. Turkey. Ham. Sweet potato casserole. Green bean casserole. Stuffing. Mashed potatoes. Gravy. Mac and cheese. Dinner rolls. Deviled eggs. Pumpkin pie. Pecan pie. Apple crisp. Cheesecake. Every single item had notes beside it. Cooking times. Serving instructions. Special requests. And beside every item was the same name. Mine. I stared at the screen. Then another message arrived. You're retired, Mom. I need all 14 dishes ready by Thursday. That was it. No, would you mind? No, could you help us? No, thank you. Just an assignment. Like I worked for her. I stood there in my quiet kitchen rereading the text. My first reaction wasn't anger. It was disappointment. Because the truth was, this wasn't completely surprising. It had been happening little by little for years. The first Thanksgiving after my husband Robert died, everyone had been kind. Jason insisted I shouldn't cook. Melissa organized everything. Relatives brought dishes. People checked on me constantly. I felt loved. Protected. Seen. But grief fades in other people's eyes long before it fades in your own. Within a couple of years, things slowly shifted. Mom, could you make your stuffing? Then, Mom, could you handle the pies too? Then, Mom, nobody makes mashed potatoes like you. Eventually, Thanksgiving became my responsibility again. Not because anyone formally asked. Because everyone assumed. And assumptions have a way of growing. A few hours after receiving the menu, I drove to meet my friend Carol for lunch. Carol and I had known each other since our teaching days. She could read my face better than most people could read a newspaper. The moment I sat down, she narrowed her eyes. What happened? I handed her my phone. She read the messages, then she read them again. Oh, Linda. That was all she said at first. Just my name. The way only old friends can say it. I shrugged. Maybe I'm overreacting. Carol looked at me over the top of her glasses. No, you're underreacting. I laughed despite myself. She doesn't mean anything by it. That's not the point. What is the point? Carol leaned forward. When was the last holiday you actually enjoyed? I opened my mouth, then closed it. I honestly couldn't answer. Every Christmas, every Easter, every 4th of July cookout, every Thanksgiving. I was always working, cooking, cleaning, organizing, packing leftovers, watching children while everyone else relaxed. Carol waited. Finally, I said, I guess I've always done those things. Because you wanted to? I didn't answer immediately, and that silence told me more than any words could. The following morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a photo album. It was one of Robert's old albums. Pictures from vacations, road trips, family gatherings. And then I found a photograph from Charleston, 20 years earlier. Robert had his arm around me. We were standing by the harbor laughing at something I couldn't even remember. On the back of the photo he'd written, "One day we'll spend Thanksgiving here." I stared at those words for a very long time. Robert had been gone for 8 years. Yet somehow that sentence felt alive. One day we'll spend Thanksgiving here. Not you'll cook Thanksgiving. Not you'll host Thanksgiving. Not you'll serve Thanksgiving. Just enjoy it. Together. Or in this case, alone. That evening I looked up flights. Just to look. Nothing serious. At least that's what I told myself. 30 minutes later I had a plane ticket. I sat back in my chair. My heart pounded. Part of me felt reckless. Part of me felt terrified. And another part felt something I hadn't felt in years. Free. I wasn't sure yet what I would do. I wasn't sure how anyone would react. But for the first time since receiving Melissa's message, I realized one thing. This Thanksgiving wasn't going to be like the others. And somehow deep down, I knew that decision was about to change far more than a holiday meal. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. Old habits. After 34 years as an elementary school teacher, my body still believed mornings were meant to start early. For a few minutes, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Then I remembered the plane ticket. Charleston, Thanksgiving. Just me. The realization brought a strange mix of excitement and guilt. I got out of bed and made coffee. Outside, the Ohio sky was gray and cold. Bare tree branches swayed in the wind. I carried my mug to the kitchen table and looked again at Melissa's menu. 14 dishes. The more I studied it, the more something bothered me. Not the number of dishes. Not even the amount of work. It was the certainty behind it. The certainty that I would say yes. The certainty that my time belonged to everyone else. That certainty hadn't appeared overnight. It had been built slowly over years, and the truth was uncomfortable. I had helped build it. Not intentionally. But every time I said yes when I wanted to say no. Every time I canceled my own plans. Every time I convinced myself that keeping the peace mattered more than speaking honestly. A small piece of this situation had become my responsibility too. That thought stayed with me throughout the day. Around noon, Jason called. I almost didn't answer. Not because I was angry. Because I already knew what the conversation would be. Hey, Mom. Hi, sweetheart. Melissa said she sent the Thanksgiving menu. There it was. Not asked. Not requested. Sent. I smiled sadly. Yes, I received it. Great, everyone's excited. Everyone! I wondered if everyone knew who was expected to create the meal they were excited about. That's nice, I said. Jason kept talking. Football plans. Relatives arriving. The grandchildren's excitement. Not once did he mention how much work Thanksgiving required. Not once did he ask whether I needed help. Again, he wasn't trying to be cruel. That was almost the saddest part. He simply didn't see it anymore. When the call ended, I sat quietly for several minutes. Then I opened a notebook. I started writing down every major holiday from the last 10 years. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, birthdays, graduation parties, baby showers, family reunions. Next to each event, I wrote who had organized it. The list surprised even me. My name appeared almost every time. Not because anyone demanded it, because everyone expected it. And eventually expectations become invisible. That afternoon, Carol stopped by. She arrived carrying takeout sandwiches and enough blunt honesty to supply an entire city. You look like you're thinking too hard. I probably am. She sat across from me. You booked the flight. I nodded. Carol grinned. Good. I'm still not sure. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. I laughed. She laughed too. Then her expression softened. Linda, can I ask you something? Sure. What are you actually afraid of? The question caught me off guard. I thought for a moment. Disappointing them. Carol nodded. Anything else? I thought longer. Finally, I said quietly, what if they stop needing me? The words surprised me the moment they left my mouth. Carol's face softened even more. Oh, honey. She reached across the table. Being loved and being needed aren't the same thing. I looked away. Because deep down I knew she was right. After Robert died, helping my family gave me purpose. The grandchildren needed rides. Jason needed advice. Melissa needed help. The family needed meals. Needed. Over time, those needs became part of my identity. Without them, who was I? The answer scared me more than I wanted to admit. That evening, I pulled out a small suitcase. The same suitcase Robert and I had used for weekend trips. As I folded clothes, memories surfaced. Robert laughing at airport security. Robert insisting on buying terrible souvenir shirts. Robert holding my hand while we walked through Charleston years earlier. I could almost hear his voice. You deserve to enjoy your life too, Linda. By Tuesday, my decision was final. The ticket remained booked. The hotel remained reserved. Now I needed to do the hardest part. Tell them. Or rather, not tell them. I wasn't interested in a family argument. I wasn't interested in being talked out of it. I wasn't interested in negotiations. For once, I wanted a simple boundary. Wednesday morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a blank piece of paper. I wrote 3 different notes. The first sounded angry. I threw it away. The second sounded defensive. I threw that one away too. Finally, I wrote exactly what I felt. No drama. No accusations. No guilt. Just honesty. I love you all. This year, I'm taking Thanksgiving off. You'll do just fine without me? Love. Mom. I read it twice. then folded it carefully. My hands trembled slightly. Not from fear, from change. Because after decades of putting everyone else first, even a small act of self-respect felt enormous. That night I barely slept. Part of me expected to cancel everything. Part of me expected guilt to win. But when the alarm rang before dawn on Thanksgiving morning, I got dressed. I picked up my suitcase. I placed the note where it would be found. Then I walked out the front door. The cold November air hit my face. For a moment I stood there listening to the silence. No demands, no grocery lists, no cooking schedules. Just silence. Then I climbed into my car and headed for the airport. Behind me, a Thanksgiving crisis was quietly beginning. I just didn't know how big it was about to become. Thanksgiving morning began at 4:15 a.m. That was the time I usually woke up every year. For a few seconds I forgot everything. Then I looked at the suitcase standing beside my bedroom door, and I smiled. The house was quiet. No turkey waiting to be seasoned. No pie dough chilling in the refrigerator. No list of 14 dishes taped to the counter. No pressure. Just me. I showered, dressed, and made a small breakfast. Outside, the neighborhood was still dark. A few houses already had kitchen lights on. Families were beginning their holiday traditions. For the first time in decades, I wasn't beginning mine. As I drank my coffee, I stared at the folded note sitting on the kitchen counter. The note looked impossibly small considering the impact it would probably have. 3 short sentences. Nothing angry. Nothing cruel. Yet I knew some people would treat it like a declaration of war. That thought almost made me laugh. How strange that saying no politely could upset people more than years of silent sacrifice. At 5:30, I picked up my suitcase. Then I placed the note exactly where Melissa would see it. Every year she came early to help organize the kitchen before guests arrived. This year she would find something different. I locked the front door, walked to my car, and drove away. The farther I got from home, the lighter I felt. Not happy exactly, more like relieved, as though I'd been carrying a heavy box for years and had finally set it down. The airport was busy. Families hurried through terminals carrying children backpacks and travel pillows. Everyone seemed to be going somewhere important. For once, so was I. While waiting at my gate, I kept expecting guilt to arrive. I expected my phone to ring. I expected myself to panic and turn around. Neither happened. The first call didn't come until I was boarding. Melissa. I stared at the screen. Then I silenced it. A few minutes later, another call. Then another. Then Jason. The crisis had begun. I switched my phone to airplane mode and stepped onto the aircraft. For the next 2 hours, there was nothing anyone could do. I settled into my seat by the window. The woman beside me looked about my age. She smiled. Visiting family for Thanksgiving. I hesitated. Then I said, actually, I'm escaping family for Thanksgiving. She laughed so hard she nearly dropped her magazine. Good for you. That simple response stayed with me. Good for you. Not selfish. Not irresponsible. Not disappointing. Good for you. By late morning, I landed in Charleston. The weather was warmer than Ohio. The air carried the faint smell of salt water. Palm trees swayed gently. The moment I stepped outside the airport, I felt something loosen inside me. I hadn't realized how badly I needed this. At the hotel, I checked in and left my suitcase in the room. Then I walked. No schedule. No errands. No grocery store runs. No cooking. Just walking. I wandered through historic streets lined with old homes and flower boxes. I passed couples holding hands. Families taking photographs. Tourists exploring the city. Eventually, I found myself standing near the harbor where Robert and I had once spent an afternoon laughing at dolphins. For a long time, I simply stood there. Memories came and went. Some made me smile. Some made me ache. 8 years after losing him, grief no longer felt like a wound. It felt more like an old scar. Still present. Still part of me. But no longer controlling my life. I sat on a bench and looked out over the water. Robert would have loved this. That thought brought comfort rather than sadness. He always worried that I took care of everyone except myself. Someday, he used to say, you're going to realize you're allowed to enjoy your own life. Maybe this was that day. Around noon, curiosity got the better of me. I turned my phone back on. The screen exploded. Voicemails, texts, missed calls. So many notifications appeared that I actually laughed. Melissa had called 11 times. Jason 6. A couple of relatives had called too. One text from Melissa read, "Call me at SAP." Another, "Where are you?" Another, "This isn't funny." I stared at the messages, then put the phone away again. Because for the first time, their emergency wasn't actually my emergency. That realization felt revolutionary. I wasn't responsible for solving every problem. I wasn't responsible for rescuing every holiday. I wasn't responsible for protecting adults from the consequences of their own assumptions. That afternoon, while I enjoyed a quiet lunch overlooking the harbor, another drama was unfolding back home. I wouldn't learn the details until later, but according to several relatives, Thanksgiving at Jason's house had become absolute chaos. Nobody knew where recipes were. Nobody knew how long to cook the turkey. Nobody knew who was bringing what. And for the first time, everyone was beginning to understand how much work one person had been doing all along. When I finally listened to the first voicemail, it was nearly 6 o'clock in the evening. The sun was beginning to set over Charleston Harbor. Orange light shimmered across the water. The restaurant around me buzzed with quiet Thanksgiving conversations. Families laughed. Glasses clinked. Servers carried plates from table to table. It felt peaceful, a world away from whatever was happening back in Ohio. I put in my earbuds and pressed play. Melissa's voice exploded into my ear. "Linda, where are you? Please call me back immediately." The message ended abruptly. I listened to the next one. This time she sounded more frustrated. "The turkey isn't done. Nobody knows where your recipes are. Jason said you left some note. Please call me." The third voicemail was different. The confidence was gone. The irritation had faded. For the first time I heard stress, real stress. I leaned back in my chair. Interesting. Over the years I had handled countless Thanksgiving disasters before they ever became visible. Turkey problems, missing ingredients, forgotten desserts, unexpected guests, arguments between relatives. I fixed everything before anyone noticed. Now they were facing those problems themselves, and apparently they weren't enjoying it. A few minutes later, another voicemail played. This one came from Jason. His voice immediately softened my heart. No matter how old our children become, part of us still hears the little boy they used to be. "Mom, call me when you can." A pause. "We should have talked before this happened." Another pause. "I didn't realize." Then the message ended. I sat quietly for a long moment. Those 3 words stayed with me. I didn't realize. Because that was the truth. Jason hadn't realized. Not really. For years he had arrived at holidays and found everything magically prepared. The food appeared. The tables were decorated. The grandchildren were entertained. The dishes were washed. Everything simply happened. When things run smoothly, people often forget someone is working hard behind the scenes. The waitress brought my dinner. Roasted turkey, sweet potatoes, fresh vegetables. Ironically, it was probably the first Thanksgiving turkey I hadn't cooked myself since the 1980s. I smiled at the thought. Then my phone vibrated again. Melissa. Again. And again. And again. By Thanksgiving dinner, she was calling non-stop. Exactly as I had imagined. Except I no longer felt satisfaction. I felt perspective. There was a difference. This wasn't revenge because I wanted them to suffer. It was a lesson because they needed to understand. Those are not the same thing. Back in Ohio, the situation continued unraveling. I would later hear the story from multiple relatives. Apparently, the first major crisis involved the stuffing. Melissa couldn't find the recipe. She tried calling me. No answer. Then she tried searching online. Unfortunately, she found dozens of different versions. None tasted like mine. The second crisis involved the pies. One burned. One never set properly. The third crisis involved timing. Half the dishes finished at different times. Some sat getting cold. Others weren't ready. The kitchen became increasingly chaotic. And then the guests started arriving. That was when the questions began. Where's Linda? Is she running late? Did she stop by the store? At first, Melissa offered vague explanations. Then somebody found the note. Everything changed. Several relatives read it. Most reacted with surprise. A few reacted with admiration. One aunt apparently laughed out loud. That aunt happened to be my older sister, Barbara. Barbara had spent years watching me do everything for everyone. According to Jason, she read the note twice before saying, "Good for her." The same words I'd heard at the airport. Good for her. Not selfish. Not cruel. Not unreasonable. Good for her. The comment opened the floodgates. Suddenly, relatives began sharing observations. One cousin mentioned how I always hosted. Another pointed out that I always cleaned afterward, too. Someone else remembered how I'd cooked while recovering from pneumonia years earlier. Story after story emerged. Sacrifice after sacrifice. For the first time, people started noticing patterns that had become invisible. And the person hearing most of those stories was Melissa. Later, Jason told me she looked genuinely shocked. Not defensive. Shocked. As though she was hearing a description of someone she thought she knew but had never fully seen. That realization mattered. Because villains make stories simple. Real people are more complicated. Melissa wasn't evil. Entitled, perhaps. Thoughtless at times. But not evil. And people can change once they finally understand what they've been doing. As darkness settled over Charleston, I finished dinner and walked slowly along the harbor. The evening air felt cool and pleasant. For the first time all day, I called Carol. She answered on the first ring. Well, I laughed. Apparently civilization is collapsing. Carol laughed so hard I had to pull the phone away from my ear. Good. I don't actually want them suffering. I know. I just wanted one holiday. You deserved one holiday. We talked for nearly half an hour. When the conversation ended, I sat on a bench overlooking the water. My phone remained full of messages, yet something had shifted. The panic back home wasn't really about food anymore. The turkey would eventually cook. The desserts would eventually get made. The guests would eventually eat. The real crisis was something else. For the first time, my family was being forced to confront a question they had avoided for years. Had they appreciated me? Or merely depended on me? The next morning I woke up surprisingly rested. For years, holidays had exhausted me before they even began. There was always a shopping list, a cooking schedule, a dozen things that could go wrong. This morning there was only sunlight spilling through the hotel curtains. I made coffee and sat on the balcony overlooking Charleston's quiet streets. For the first time in a very long time, I had nowhere I needed to be. No one needed me to fix anything. At least that was the theory. My phone suggested otherwise. 29 missed calls, 14 text messages, 7 voicemails. I stared at the screen. Then I laughed. Not because their panic was funny, because the contrast was so dramatic. 1 week earlier, nobody seemed concerned about whether I wanted to cook 14 dishes. Now everyone desperately wanted my attention. Funny how quickly priorities change. I decided to listen to the newest voicemail. Jason. His voice sounded tired. Not angry. Tired. Mom, call me when you can. A pause. Then another. I'm sorry. I sat up a little straighter. Jason wasn't a man who apologized easily. Not because he was arrogant. Because he usually believed problems could be solved through action rather than conversation. Hearing that word mattered. I'm really sorry, he repeated. I should have paid more attention. The message ended there. No excuses, no blame. Just an apology. I listened to it twice. Then I put the phone down. Around noon, another voicemail arrived. Melissa. I hesitated before pressing play. Her voice sounded completely different from the day before. Gone was the frustration. Gone was the irritation. Instead, she sounded exhausted. Linda, I don't even know what to say. A shaky laugh followed. I think I've washed dishes for 4 straight hours. Another pause. The kitchen still looks terrible. For some reason, that image made me smile. Then her voice softened. I didn't realize how much work you did. There it was again. The same phrase. I didn't realize. The message continued. I know you're probably upset with me. A long silence. Maybe you should be. That caught my attention. Because accountability is rare, especially when emotions are running high. Melissa took a breath. Anyway, call me when you're ready. The voicemail ended. I stared at the harbor for a long time afterward. Something important was happening. Not because Thanksgiving had fallen apart. Not because people were inconvenienced. Because understanding was beginning. And understanding changes people. Later that afternoon, I met Carol for a video call. She was sitting in her living room wearing fuzzy slippers and eating leftover pie. Well, she asked. I told her about the messages. She nodded slowly. Sounds like reality finally arrived. I laughed. Maybe. No, definitely. Carol pointed her fork at the screen. For years they experienced Thanksgiving as guests. She paused. You experienced it as staff. That sentence hit harder than I expected. Because she wasn't entirely wrong. I loved my family. I truly did. But somewhere along the way my role had quietly shifted. Host. Cook. Babysitter. Planner. Problem solver. Cleaner. The person everyone counted on. The person nobody noticed. Until she wasn't there. That evening I walked through Charleston's historic district. The streets glowed beneath old lanterns. Couples strolled past. Restaurants buzzed with conversation. The city felt alive. As I walked, I thought about Robert. He would have understood this immediately. My husband had always noticed things other people missed. Whenever family gatherings ended, he used to help clean without being asked. When guests thanked me for dinner, he always made sure they thanked me twice. And whenever I started taking on too much, he would gently say, "You know you're allowed to rest, right?" At the time, I usually laughed. Now I wished I had listened more carefully. Near sunset, my phone rang again. This time I answered, "Hello." For a second nobody spoke. Then I heard Melissa. "Linda." "Hi, Melissa." The relief in her voice was immediate. "Oh, thank goodness." I almost smiled. Not because she sounded desperate, because she sounded human. The conversation started awkwardly, both of us searching for the right words. Finally, she said, "The turkey was dry." I laughed before I could stop myself. To my surprise, she laughed too. Then she said something I never expected. "I think I owe you an apology." I remained quiet. Melissa continued, "I knew you worked hard." A pause. "But I didn't know." The distinction mattered. Knowing and understanding are different things. She took a deep breath. "When everyone started talking yesterday," another pause, "I realized how much you've been doing for all of us." I listened. No interruptions. No lectures. No victory speech. Just listening. Because this wasn't about winning. It never had been. Eventually, she said, "I've been treating your help like it was automatic." I looked out across the harbor. Finally, I replied, "Melissa helping people feels good." "It does. But being expected to help all the time feels different." Silence. Then, "I understand that now." For the first time, I believed she actually might. When the call ended, I sat alone on a bench near the water. The evening breeze moved gently across the harbor. My phone was finally quiet. Not because people had stopped calling, because the message had finally been received. The lesson had never been about 14 dishes. It had never been about Thanksgiving. It was about something much deeper. The people we love most often become invisible precisely because they are always there. And sometimes the only way to be seen again is to step away. I flew home 3 days later. The Ohio sky greeted me with low gray clouds and the familiar chill of late November. Normally, coming home after a trip felt comforting. This time I felt something else. Curiosity. Because I knew the real conversation still hadn't happened. The phone calls. The voicemails. The apologies. Those were only the beginning. Real change required something harder. Honesty. As I pulled into my driveway, everything looked exactly the same. The mailbox. The flower beds. The porch Robert had painted 3 summers before he died. Nothing had changed. Yet somehow everything felt different. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house was quiet. Peaceful. For a moment, I simply stood there breathing in the familiar scent of home. Then my phone rang. "Jason," I answered. "Hi, sweetheart." "Mom." His voice sounded nervous. "Are you home?" I just walked in. A brief pause. "Can I come over?" "Of course." He arrived 30 minutes later. When I opened the door, I immediately noticed something unusual. My son looked uncomfortable. Not defensive. Not angry. Uncomfortable. That alone told me this conversation mattered. We sat at the kitchen table where he had done homework as a boy, where Robert had read newspapers on Sunday mornings, where countless family meals had been shared. Jason wrapped both hands around a coffee mug. Then he looked directly at me. I'm embarrassed. There it was. No excuses. No explanations. Just truth. I waited. Jason rubbed his forehead. "Mom, I honestly didn't see it." I remained quiet. "I knew you did a lot." His expression tightened. "But I didn't realize how much." The same phrase again. I didn't realize. I wondered how many family problems begin with those 3 words, Jason continued. "After you left, people started talking." I smiled slightly. "I heard." He laughed despite himself. "Aunt Barbara practically gave a speech." That sounded exactly like Barbara. Jason shook his head. Everyone kept telling stories. He looked down at the table. Things I never noticed, like driving grandchildren to appointments, watching children when schools closed unexpectedly, hosting family gatherings, helping relatives move, preparing meals after surgeries, organizing birthdays, remembering anniversaries, keeping the entire family connected. The invisible work. The work nobody notices until it disappears. Jason swallowed hard. I think I got used to it. His honesty impressed me. Many people spend their entire lives avoiding uncomfortable truths. My son was facing one directly. "You know what hurt the most?" he asked. "What?" I wasn't surprised when Melissa sent that menu. The admission hung in the air, because he understood exactly what it meant. If he wasn't surprised, then somewhere deep down he had accepted the arrangement too. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but still accepted it. I reached across the table and touched his hand. "Jason." He looked up. "I know you love me." His eyes immediately filled with emotion. "Of course I do." I never doubted that. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly. Because love wasn't the issue. Awareness was. We talked for nearly 2 hours, not arguing, not blaming, simply talking. The way families should more often. By the time he stood to leave, I felt lighter. Not because everything had been solved, because progress had begun. At the door, Jason hugged me tightly. Longer than usual. I'm sorry, Mom. I know. I mean it. I know. And for the first time, I truly believed him. The next afternoon, Melissa arrived. Alone. I won't lie. I felt nervous. Far more nervous than I had been with Jason. Mother-in-law and daughter-in-law relationships are complicated. Even good ones. Pride gets involved. Misunderstandings grow roots. Old frustrations hide beneath polite conversations. When I opened the door, Melissa looked exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. She carried herself differently than usual. Less certain. Less controlled. More vulnerable. We sat in the living room. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. I owe you a huge apology. I waited. Melissa looked down at her hands. I've been replaying everything. Her voice trembled slightly. The menu. The calls. Thanksgiving. Another pause. Then she said something that surprised me. I don't think I ever asked myself how much pressure I was putting on you. That wasn't an excuse. That was self-reflection. A rare and valuable thing. Slowly, the conversation deepened. Melissa admitted that over the years, my help had become normal in her mind. Expected. Automatic. Reliable. Like electricity. Always there. Until one day it wasn't. And then everyone noticed. Tears appeared in her eyes. I never meant to make you feel used. For a moment I saw not my daughter-in-law. I saw a woman juggling work, children, marriage responsibilities, and expectations. A woman who had gradually stopped seeing the sacrifices being made around her. Not because she was cruel. Because she was overwhelmed. That realization softened something inside me. Compassion and boundaries can exist together. Many people think they are opposites. They're not. I took a slow breath. Then I said the most important thing I had learned during my trip. Melissa, love given freely feels wonderful. She nodded. But love expected as an obligation eventually becomes resentment. The room fell silent. Because both of us knew that was the truth. Not just for Thanksgiving. For every relationship. Every family. Every friendship. Melissa wiped her eyes. Then she nodded again. This time more firmly. I understand. And for the first time since receiving that Thanksgiving menu, I believed she did. A year later, Thanksgiving looked completely different. Not because the recipes had changed. Not because the guest list was smaller. Not because anyone had forgotten what happened the previous year. It looked different because everyone remembered. That was the difference. The lesson hadn't disappeared once the holiday ended. It had stayed with us. By early November, Jason created a family group chat. Normally, that wouldn't have been remarkable. What happened next was, instead of asking me what I would be cooking, he posted a spreadsheet. A spreadsheet. I nearly laughed. Every family member was assigned a dish. Turkey, stuffing, desserts, side dishes, appetizers, even cleanup duties. Everyone had responsibilities. Everyone contributed. Everyone participated. And for the first time in years, my name appeared exactly once. One dessert. That's it. Just one. Melissa called me shortly afterward. How do you feel about making your apple crisp? I smiled. That sounds wonderful. No assumptions. No demands. No instructions. Just a question. The difference felt enormous. As Thanksgiving approached, something else changed too. The grandchildren became involved. Instead of showing up after everything was finished, they helped prepare. My oldest grandson learned how to peel potatoes. My granddaughter helped bake cookies. The younger children set tables. The holiday became a family event rather than a service being provided by one exhausted woman. Robert would have loved it. That thought crossed my mind more than once. On Thanksgiving morning, I woke up relaxed. No alarm. No frantic schedule. No pressure. I drank coffee and watched the sunrise from my kitchen window. Then I prepared my apple crisp. One dessert. Because I wanted to. Not because 14 people expected me to. The distinction mattered. By noon, I arrived at Jason and Melissa's house. The moment I walked inside, I knew something was different. The kitchen was busy. Jason was checking the turkey. Melissa was finishing side dishes. The grandchildren were helping. Several relatives were already setting up tables. Nobody looked overwhelmed. Nobody looked resentful. People were working together, the way families are supposed to. Barbara spotted me first. She grinned. Look who finally gets to enjoy Thanksgiving. I laughed. Several relatives greeted me warmly. Then Melissa walked over carrying a bowl of mashed potatoes. For a second I remembered the menu. The 14 dishes, the missed calls, the painful conversations, everything that had happened a year earlier. Melissa set down the bowl. Then she hugged me. Right there in front of everyone. Happy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving. She stepped back and smiled. Then something unexpected happened. She cleared her throat. The room gradually quieted. Jason looked surprised. So did I. Melissa glanced around at the family. Then she said, "Before we eat, I want to say something." Every conversation stopped. Melissa looked directly at me. "I owe Linda a thank you." The room became completely silent. She continued. "For years, she carried holidays on her shoulders." A pause. And honestly, most of us, including me, stopped noticing. Nobody interrupted. Nobody disagreed. Because everyone knew it was true. Melissa smiled at me. "Last Thanksgiving taught me something important." She looked around the room. "Love isn't supposed to be one person doing everything while everyone else enjoys the results." Several heads nodded, including mine. "We're all responsible for taking care of each other." Her voice softened. "And Linda, thank you for everything you've done for this family." I felt emotion rise unexpectedly in my chest. Not because of the attention, not because of the apology, because I finally felt seen, truly seen. After years of invisible effort that mattered more than I can explain, the meal that followed was one of the happiest Thanksgivings I can remember. Not because the food was perfect. In fact, a few dishes weren't. The turkey was slightly overcooked. One pie cracked. The rolls came out a little darker than intended. Nobody cared. People laughed, talked, shared stories, helped each other. The imperfections made it feel real, human, family. Later that evening after dessert, I stood by the window watching my grandchildren play in the backyard. The sun was beginning to set. Golden light stretched across the grass. For a moment I thought about Robert. I imagined telling him everything that had happened. The menu, the flight, the missed calls, the conversations, the changes. And I could almost hear him laughing. Not because of the chaos, because he would have known all along what I was finally learning. Setting a boundary isn't an act of rejection. It's an act of respect. Respect for yourself, and ultimately respect for the people you love. Because healthy relationships cannot survive on sacrifice alone. They need gratitude. They need balance. They need honesty. As I watched my family together, I realized something important. Leaving that note had never been about Thanksgiving dinner. It had been about teaching all of us, including myself, that kindness should be appreciated, not assumed. And sometimes the most loving thing we can do is stop saying yes to everything. If this story reminded you of someone who gives more than they receive, or if you've ever struggled to set a healthy boundary with people you love, I hope you'll share your thoughts below. And if stories about family dignity and second chances speak to your heart, I'd be honored if you joined me again.